Steven Spielberg, we know a lot about him. He's got many books written about him. He's done interviews, several hundreds rather, of interviews about his films. He had an uncomfortable childhood, though. They moved around all the time as he was growing up, so he never quite settled into a particular school. And also he felt that he was a nerd, didn't fit in with the jocks, as they would call them, the sporting ones with muscles in places where I haven't even got places. And on top of that, he was Jewish, which in his culture, sadly at that time, was not a positive thing for many people. So he hid his Jewishness. He hid it, in fact, until he did the film Schindler's List, when he embraced what that meant for him. His parents, his father was a workaholic, similar to Hook in the film, and he didn't really get on with his dad, although his dad gave him a camera to work with, kind of to give him something to do. His mum was more of a sister. She didn't really like him going to school. She liked him being around the house, so she used to lie to school about him being unwell so that she could have him at home with him. He didn't do well academically at all. He didn't like his dad because he saw the family breaking up over 10 years. It was a 10-year argument between mum and dad, and when the truth came out, it was actually that his mum had been having an affair with one of their neighbours and close friends, and so the family split apart. It was a tough time for him. Steven Spielberg says, everything about me is in my films. And it rings true because so many of his films are about dysfunctional families or estranged children. Just think the Sugarland Express, his first one, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., The Colour Purple, Empire of the Sun, Hook, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, AI, War of the Worlds, Tintin, the BFG. They're all about dysfunctional families or children that don't quite fit or feel that they are overlooked by their parents. He made his first feature film, which Kev spoke about, Jewel, when he was just 24 years old, and he's directed 34 films in the last 42 years, of which 2 are in the top 10 grossing films of all time when you adjust the figure according to inflation, and those films are E.T. and Jaws. Jaws is a film about the familiar, an everyday environment, a sleepy seaside town where the 4th of July is looming and everyone will have fun and make some money. And that becomes a hostile environment at a certain moment, and everything changes. In this series, The Gospel According to, we're linking each of them with a character from the Gospel of the Book of John. And today we meet the man born blind in a familiar everyday environment where something happens and everything changes. John chapter 9, let's watch together.
As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed. came home seeing.
And came home seeing. Unlike Steven Spielberg, we know next to nothing about the man born blind, only what we find in John chapter 9. What we do know is that in Jesus' day, in their religious culture, they believed that if you were born blind or something like that, it's because you or your parents had done something wrong. Or if you got ill as you went on, it's because you or your parents had done something wrong. And that wealth was seen as blessing from God. It was almost a prosperity gospel, exemplified and amplified beyond what we would see today, and it was wrong. Maybe the man born blind even bought into this. Maybe he even thought, well, maybe my parents did something wrong, and there was a dislocation there, like Steven Spielberg had with his parents. It's interesting, isn't it, the untruths that we can just believe because they're part of the cultural or religious or spiritual air we breathe. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life and my journey with Jesus where I've had to sit and reflect and think, actually, although maybe I was taught that, or although I kind of thought that, I don't think that's right anymore. And we have to turn our back on those things. Jesus corrects the disciples' misunderstandings when they say, who sinned for this man to be born blind? And Jesus basically says, look, guys, rather than looking for a culprit, let's get on and work, because God's working. God is working and active in this situation. So rather than trying to work out who's done the wrong thing, let's forget that question and get on with actually moving on and getting on with things. In the film Mary Magdalene, Jesus is played by the actor Joaquin Phoenix. This was a film that was out a couple of years ago, and he was meant to act out this scene, but they changed it. They changed it so that Jesus heals a woman who'd been born blind. And Joaquin Phoenix looked at the script and he refused to do this. He said in his own words, I thought, I'm not going to rub dirt in her eyes. Who would do that? It doesn't make any sense. That is a horrible introduction to seeing. I like that last phrase. That is a horrible introduction to seeing. And let's be honest, wouldn't most of us think, Jesus, why did you do this miracle this way? There are other ones where you just healed people instantly there. Why did you put mud in this guy's eyes, mud that you'd made by spitting on the dirt, and then made him go to a pool that was miles away with the ironic name of Scent? So this guy probably went on his own. He can't see where he's going. He's going with his stick, and you made him go all that way. Did you go to Spurgeon's College, Jesus, and do the pastoral care course in year one? I don't think you probably did, but we miss with Joaquin Phoenix the point of what Jesus was doing there. When Jesus performs a miracle in John's Gospel, they're always called signs. They point to a bigger thing. The miracle, although fantastic, is not the end in itself. It's a sign to something that Jesus is talking about. In the creation story, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, that ancient poetic story, we're told that God breathed life into the earth and made man and woman made man out of it, and then made woman out of the man. Better version the second time round, I'm sure we'd all agree. God breathes into it and he speaks life into it. One of the ancient saints said that we are animated dirt. I like that phrase. That we are animated dirt. Without God's breath, without God's voice in us, we're nothing. With God's breath, with God's voice in us, we are made in his image. Jesus here is symbolically reenacting the creation story. He's saying in a subtle way to his disciples, the crowd, and the Pharisees, who are the teachers of the law, I was there at the beginning. When all this rocked up, I was there and was part of it happening. He wants them to see that he is the light of the world on earth with them now, who was present back then. But the question is, will they see it? I remember going to see Saving Private Ryan with my dad. We used to go to the cinema quite often, just him and I. And he'd always buy a huge bag of pick and mix when we got there. And I'd always say, Dad, let's get some stuff at the garage. It's so much cheaper. You know, because my dad would get, it would be like a rucksack full in this paper bag, ready for Duke of Edinburgh bronze that he'd take in. And he would eat all the way through quite loudly. It was a bit hard of hearing towards the end, so he didn't hear how loudly he chewed, but he'd sit there and chew, and the gulp would be, this huge gulp. And we sat down for Saving Private Ryan, and the place was packed. About 3 rows in front of us were a handful of men who were of the age that they would have been in World War II. And the first, I think, 22 minutes of that film is absolutely brutal. If you have a weak stomach or anything like that, I really, in all seriousness, encourage you to not watch this film. The film goes on for about 2.5, 3 hours. And my dad and I didn't touch our bags of pick and mix at any point in that film. And it was the first film I walked out of where everyone, hundreds of people, walked out in complete silence. It was such a powerful moment. Why? Because actually in the film there's no victory. War is shown for what it really is, and it's confusion and loss. In the clip we saw right at the beginning of our service together, when the old man asks his wife, "Did I lead a good life?" He's asking a question decades on at the end of the film of, was it worth those men going and dying to save me? He's confused, and the film all the way through just makes us question what is right, what is true, what is going on here. And after the wonderful miracle in this Bible passage of John 9, there is confusion about what has actually happened.
His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed. And then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
They're divided, the crowd. Some believe him, some don't. They want to know if he's the real man. They've got so many questions about how it happened. The Empire of the Sun is about an inquisitive young boy, Christian Bale, as you can see here, who went on to play Batman and many other people. And he lives in Shanghai in a privileged quarter where the Europeans live until war arrives, and then he loses everything and becomes this vagabond with a very strange man who tries to take control of him. And the film is one where he loses his innocence and his security, and everything is questioned. And it finishes not with reassurance, but with a question mark. What will this boy become as a result of all that he has experienced in the harshness of war? And what about the blind man? What will become of him when he meets the religious leaders, the Pharisees?
They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet."
I like it that Jesus has performed this miracle and then kind of wandered off and left the guy to it. I wonder if the guy thought, "Jesus, it would be kind of handy if you turned up now." Because the religious leaders, the Pharisees, they're the big guns of the day, and they want to know who has healed on the Sabbath. They want to know who's done this. They want to find a culprit. And the man born blind says, "Well, I don't know. I didn't see him, did I? But I do believe that he is a prophet." What will happen to the man born blind? It's a question we ask as we watch E.T. What's going to happen to this extraterrestrial with the really long neck who does all kinds of bizarre things, and it takes us by a shock when he actually, I don't know, is it male or female, E.T.? Anyone? No one knows. Someone text in, please, and let me know. When E.T. dies, it takes us by surprise. I do find it bizarre that the alien lives in the home with Elliot, the boy. He's the middle child. There's a bit of symbolism there, isn't he, with his young blonde sister and his older brother who thinks he's really streetwise and tough and just doesn't really do much at home. The dad's not around, and the mum is so consumed with life and work and all the busyness that she doesn't even notice that there is an alien living in their home. I'd like to think if there was an alien living in our home, I would be able to pick up on that in some way, shape or form. It's not great parenting by the mum. And I'm not sure that the parenting in our passage is that great either. John chapter 9 continues.
They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him."
Even his parents are now divided. The crowd are divided by the man born blind. The Pharisees are divided, and now his parents are. And they keep saying, "Ask our son, don't talk to us about it. He was the one that actually experienced it." That's so sad, isn't it? Because wouldn't you want to, if your son had been born blind, just be able to embrace him and say, "Look, this is my face. Look, these are my hands. Let's show you our home. Let's show you the village that we've grown up in." But they don't. They are consumed with pushing it back onto their son. Why? Because the Pharisees are threatening to throw them out of the synagogue. And the synagogue in Jesus' day wasn't just the place where you went to worship God. It was also the community hub. It's where you went and gossiped and found out stuff about what's going on. It's where you went to barter and share your food in the week. It was the central place for your village or town. And to be excluded from that meant to be excluded from society. Spiritually, emotionally, and physically. That's why they push the question back onto their son, because they don't want to be thrown out of the place in which they live. The colour purple is a film about division, about being ostracised, about being on the edge. And in that film, a woman gives birth and you hear the baby crying. The baby crying is Steven Spielberg recording the birth of his first son. And he recorded that so that he could use it in the film. I don't know about you, I'd feel a bit uncomfortable, wouldn't you? You're giving birth to your first child, it's a precious moment, and your husband is like, take two actually, can we just do that again? Okay, got it, thank you, brilliant. And he puts that into his film. But it says to me that Steven Spielberg lived a whole life. It wasn't cinema, family, it was the whole thing. Did you hear him when he was talking at the beginning about, I've got 7 kids and I tell them stories? He wanted everything to be a whole. And that reflects with the blind man as well. Let's watch together.
A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out.
This man has a whole life now, not filmmaking and family, but with Jesus giving him his sight. He's saying, look, I don't really care if he healed me on the Sabbath. The big thing is that Jesus healed me. I have a whole, complete life. And for that, for refusing to make Jesus the culprit, for refusing to deny Jesus, the blind man gets thrown out of the synagogue. He is ostracized. He is nowhere. A bit like Tom Hanks in the film Terminal. He plays Victor Navorsky. I think this is based on a true story of a guy who is stuck in an airport for several months in no man's land. He is vulnerable and alone. And that's where we find the man born blind as we come towards the end of this Bible reading.
Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him.
Amidst all the division in the crowd, division in the Pharisees, division from his parents, division from the synagogue and his community, amongst all of that, the man born blind sees Jesus and finds unity with Jesus. Jesus brings him back to the God he'd been told throughout his whole life that he wasn't quite good enough for, because there must have been something that he or his parents did wrong so that he ended up in the way that he was. And Jesus releases him from that. The film Hook is about Peter Pan becoming a workaholic father. And the film's journey is one of saying, will Peter Pan truly see who he is? Will he embrace those childlike qualities again? Will he remain blind, or will he see? And this is the question that Jesus poses quite pointedly to the religious leaders at the end of our Bible passage.
Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
Jesus doesn't hold back, does he? Who is really blind in this story? Jesus says the Sabbath-infatuated religious leaders are. The ones who are about rules and regulations, in and out, black and white, rather than about the love and the kingdom of God. Jesus doesn't hold back, and he shows them their division from God. Eugene Peterson, a pastor in America who wrote the Message version of the Bible and so many other books, said that if we are serious about our Christian faith and following Jesus, there will be a joy in our life. He said, if we're a Christian who's always got a frown and is always looking for the thing that we should feel guilty about or the thing that we've done wrong, that's not being serious. Serious about our faith means that we realise that we are forgiven, that we have seen what Jesus has done on the cross for us, that we repent of the things that we've done wrong. Sin is the old-fashioned biblical word for that. And then we live a life of joy. Joy is different to happy. Happy is, oh, everything's going well in my life. Joy is saying, even when I have hard times, there is a deep-rooted foundation that keeps me going with God. If we're serious about our faith, we will see what Jesus has done and we'll be filled with joy about it. Amistad is a film about a Portuguese slave ship where those that own it die, and there are 40 slaves left, and they end up on land in America, and they don't know what to do with these slaves. Are they still slaves or are they free men? And they are imprisoned while they go through a trial with them. And there's a brilliant bit where the white men are talking about what they should do with these black slaves, and one of the slaves, the one you see on the screen, stands up with his handcuffs, and he's learned a little bit of English now, and he stands up and he says, "Give us free, give us free," and he just keeps saying, "Give us free," and they say, "Please be quiet," and he will not stop, because he's realised that he's a human being and he deserves a chance at life. He has seen, and what's he seen? He's seen in their jail a Bible with pictures in that has been given to the slaves. And one of them, who can read English a little bit, has begun to piece together with the pictures the story of this man called Jesus. And it ends with this Jesus dying and rising again and going to heaven. And he says to his fellow slave inmate, "This is life. This is freedom." And they see that beyond their shackles, which should be removed, that there is life for them. What's the gospel according to Steven Spielberg? Gospel literally means good news. I think the gospel according to Steven Spielberg, in my humble opinion, is that in a world of horror and heartache, if we look, we can see and we can find hope. I don't know about you, but in this last year, there's been a whole bucket load of horror. There's been a whole tub load of heartache. And if we look to Jesus in a simple picture Bible, in our times with him on our own, in those walks with someone we know, trust and respect, then we can see and find hope for the future. My question for us is, for me, do I see Jesus? Do you notice all the different ways that they talk about Jesus in this passage? They say Jesus is a sinner. Jesus is a man. Jesus is a fellow. Sounds very English there, doesn't he? Jesus is a rabbi. Jesus is a prophet. And right at the end, when the man born blind sees Jesus and meets him, he says he's Lord. And that's where we've got to get to, my friends, isn't it? That Jesus is Lord, because we know Jesus isn't a sinner. We know he's a man, a fellow. We know that he's a rabbi, a good teacher, and we know that he had a prophetic profundity to him. But we have to end with him being Lord, because Lord Jesus dwells in our midst in all the division that we face and experience, and he enables us to see and unites us with God. In this pandemic that's still rumbling on, let's keep looking to the Jesus who opened our eyes to God, that he may give us hope amidst the heartache and the horror.